in what he is doing and what he is accomplishing at Utah Valley University. And thus one of the reasons why we invited him to speak today. I'm sometimes harassed in the education community for wanting to move too fast. But Paul Edwards, who's the former provost of SVU, is always telling me I'm moving too slow. And so we've strategically put Matt here in the middle as Paul and I are going to lob ideas around. We want this to be discussion in nature. I know with a large group that's sometimes hard, but we hope throughout you guys will raise hands and say, well, what about this and what about that? Let me just introduce the concept real quickly. Our objective here in the state, and we're investing significantly in doing it, is to significantly improve, and these words matter, the relevance and the depth of what our students know and what they can do. Oftentimes as employers, we care most about what they can do. But in an evolving workforce, what they know and therefore their ability to evolve with that workforce is absolutely critical, and one of the tightropes that higher education tries to balance. And in Utah, the governor stated the goal of 66% of all of our adults having some degree of post-secondary education. And today, we're at 43%. So we've got a ways to go. But the reasons to do this are very compelling, both economically and socially. Because by 2020, 66% of the jobs are going to require a post-secondary education. In particular, the jobs that we want here in Utah, the higher paying, more secure jobs. See, those in Utah that have a post-secondary education have a mean personal annual compensation 75% higher than those that don't. They are 2.6 times more likely to be in a salary job rather than an hourly job. And right now we're seeing a tale of two economies. We know that the unemployment rate in Utah is 5.2% and the United States is 7.6%, but what's often forgotten is those that have a post-secondary degree, their unemployment rate's much lower. Those that don't, their unemployment rate is much higher. And it's not just that their unemployment rate's higher, their length of unemployment is much longer, which has real implications. There's social benefits. People with a degree or certificate in Utah claim to be happier, feel happier in their marriage, they enjoy a good family life, they claim to be healthy, and have greater job security. They are significantly less likely to be incarcerated, to rely on such things as food stamps and other things, and they're 50% more likely to vote. So we're going to talk just briefly about the challenges. Natalie Gochner talked a little bit about these. Let me expound just a tad. One of the challenges is you just saw me articulate we need 66% with some degree of post-secondary education, and yet, if you look at this graph right over here, our number of 25 to 34-year-olds with a post-secondary education is actually decreasing. In fact, only 49% or 49% of our 18 to 24-year-olds in the state are not currently enrolled in a post-secondary education. And those that are, about 75% of them require some degree of remediation. Then you look at the challenge around funding. Just 4 or 5 years ago, the state contributed 63%, or grants and federal and state, 63% of a student's education funding. Today, 49%. Okay, so we're putting more and more of the burden on the student. Third challenge is with our female audience in Utah. Up until 1999, we had more females enrolled and graduating with a post-secondary education than the rest of the country. And that's fallen precipitously. Something that the state, for very good reasons, is quite concerned. Fourth, the LDS Church just changed the missionary age, 18 and 19, and Matt's smiling, but you look at the bottom number of projected loss of 6.2 million to 8.1 million just in 2013-2014 academic year, and he's trying to figure out how to do that. Fifth challenge. 43% of Utah's Hispanic population are not even graduating from high school. And that audience is growing 4.5 times faster than the white population here in the state. Has nothing to do with skin color per se. This is an issue of a changing demographic and a need for us to more aggressively solve that. Sixth challenge, and there's probably 20, but we'll finish with this one, and that is that employers are increasingly saying, I've got open job recs and I can't fill them. The governor likes to frequently talk about going and meeting with the COO of L3 out in New York and saying, won't you relocate more jobs? And the COO is saying, Governor, I've got 400 open recs in Utah. You got to graduate the people that can fill those positions. So we've got challenges. And what's going to be fun today, because I'm going to stop now, in a minute I'm going to stop, is that President Holland, Paul Edwards, myself, we're going to kind of sit down and talk as a panel. Today we are going to talk about ideas. And we're going to talk about what we can do to help solve this, because Utah's unique in that there's really a collaborative spirit. Everybody wants to help. And we actually do want to make real changes. So we're going to talk about some ideas. We're not going to pass the buck. I like to say that higher education always says, well, we're having to remediate everybody from high school. High school's not preparing them. High school says, well, that's because junior high is a black hole. Junior high says, well, it's because the kids aren't learning how to read in elementary school. The elementary schools are saying, well, they're not coming prepared when they arrive at kindergarten. And the parents are saying, well, those aren't our kids. So everybody keeps passing the buck. We're not going to pass the buck today. In fact, for the most part, we're going to talk about kind of higher education. So the last mile before the student arrives into the workforce. We're going to be open to any and all good ideas. No turf protection. And we will not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Meaning, we're not going to achieve perfect. But we want good ideas that actually will move the bar. So I'm going to start out and turn it to Matt. I'm going to start with this question. And then President Holland is going to kind of respond to it. And then we're going to throw out some ideas, all right? And I've got a few more that I'm going to hit President Holland with or Paul with his experience. And again, we're just going to talk openly. This was the concept of this forum, and that is, let's just have an open dialogue as best as we can to come up with some of the best ideas. So my first idea, President Holland, that we'll lob out, is increasingly migrating to what we'll refer to as stackable credentials. See, too often we think of education as being terminal. You always hear people say, I'm a college graduate, or I'm not a college graduate, right? I mean, these demarcation points, and yet an education should be perpetual, constant learning. Imagine for a minute, if we migrate towards stackable credentials. I'm going to use an easy example, but there's harder examples that align just as well, whether that be in accounting or engineering or even philosophy. But let's take nursing. Imagine a student coming in to UVU and saying to their counselor, I want to be a nurse. And that counselor saying, great. At UVU, we got a great program. Because we want you to leave at whatever stage you leave better prepared to enter the workforce. So in your first 4 months, you're going to become a certified phlebotomist. When you graduate, you'll be able to make $12 an hour. If you stay for 18 months, you'll get your LPN, make $16 an hour. If you stay for 32 months, we'll get you to an RN, making $20 an hour. If you'll stay to 48, we'll make you a BSN, making $25 an hour. Heck, if you'll stay for 72, you'll be a nurse practitioner, making $35 an hour. But at any time you get off the bus, or if you need to fund your education with a part-time job, you're going to be equipped with a higher paying job. You're going to be better qualified, and it's going to help us align with what the workforce demands are. How do we get there? We're seeing it at Texas Tech School of Nursing with competency-based transcripting as an example. There's models out there, so we wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. And I would dare say that in achieving the governor's goal of 66%, just by implementing this type of approach, we could gain as much as 13 percentage points towards that goal. President.
Thank you, Randy, for the invitation to be here. Thank you to all of you. I think this The attendance speaks for itself about the importance we all see for higher education, education in general, to be a critical component of how we move forward economic development in particular, but just more generally the health and well-being of the state that we live in. So to the specific issue, I am absolutely on board with Randy's suggestion that stackable credentials have tremendous power in and of themselves in terms of the range of opportunity that they provide, and that one of the powers of this model is that so often young people just for whatever reason do not have a full range vision of what they can become. I mean, the people in this room, my guess is, if we surveyed all of you, by and large, either in some inherent individual way or because of the families you came from, are you're people that had vision and ambition and knew you could go places. But there are just so many in our community who don't see that necessarily. And so to bring them in thinking they can do things at one level and have them be part of an organization, institution that can then show them with guideposts and suggestions how they can move up to do more, so often students will rise to the occasion if they're guided in this fashion. And so at a very conceptual level, I'm very much in favor of the stackable credentials. I guess if I were to say anything more in response to that would be to say I think it ought to be stackable credentials plus, that it ought to be even more broadly conceived than that, which is really what I think a number of the institutions are trying to do here in Utah. Certainly it's what UVU is trying to do, and that is to say that our universities, not just our community colleges, but our universities should not just be embracing stackable credentials, but need to embrace and enshrine certificate programs and two-year degrees. And this is a tricky thing to do if we're being candid with each other, because what universities face is this continual pressure to increase rigor, to increase critical thinking skills, communication skills, et cetera. And there are, for lots of reasons, we can discuss them if you want to, but for lots of reasons, what this tends to translate into then is, will then become a Tier 1 research institution. That's where the rigor is. It's the four-year degrees, the master's degrees, the PhDs. That's where the renown is, that's where the rigor is, that's where the sophistication is. And so if that's what you want, that everybody ought to push towards that. But at some level, that's true, and every state, every economy should have some institutions that look like that. But we simply cannot afford to have every institution look like that, and we don't need to. And so what we're trying to do at UVU, and I think places like Weber and Dixie are doing as well in their own version of it, is to say, yes, we have to increase rigor. We have to have higher and higher expectations of faculty and students alike. But we must not do this in some sort of blind aspiration to become a Tier 1 research institution. And so rather than continue to climb that Carnegie classification, we will say we are proud of the fact that we have certificate programs and we have two-year programs, and we want to encourage students to come in, and if that's what they think they can do and want to do, great. And if they veer off with a certificate, they veer off with a two-year degree, and they've got something, and they've got something that leaves them better equipped. The power of this is that many students who come in thinking, well, I'll come and I'll get a certificate, I'll get a two-year degree, then realize, hey, I am at a university and I am competing and I can do this. And so I came in to study, I was going to be an auto mechanic, and I'm getting a classic career and technical trade education. But then at a place like UVU, you can transfer that into, if you come and you're succeeding, into a four-year degree, technology management degree. So now no longer are you just able to kind of go work on your car. You can go run your own shop. And I think that's more of the model we need to move to, and stackable credentials would be a key component of that. I think it's one limitation is there are some fields, you admitted you picked the low-hanging fruit, and there's some fields that really lend themselves to a very clear step-ladder function like that. There are other fields, though, that need a little more expansiveness, where it wouldn't necessarily be the key stackable credential, but you could think about a general certificate that moves to an associate's degree, that moves to a bachelor's degree, and that slightly more holistic approach to this is absolutely what I think some of our institutions need to do, and it's what UVU is trying to do.
On the issue of stackable credentials, I see just one of the real major stumbling blocks for innovation in higher education is that we have a number of things that are just baked in, both culturally, professionally, and legally, in a regulatory nature, into higher education that make it very hard to do the kind of radical innovation that we need to have in order to experiment with this kind of delivery system. The traditional delivery system of the four-year residential college is a magnificent innovation in the United States and served us very well with the development of the Morrill Act and things that went on after that, when we got into the GI Bill and so on. We picked a lot of low-hanging fruit in this country with that model. Educationally, the low-hanging fruit was there, and we did a superb job. But most of the marginal populations that we now need to address, the needs of working adults, the needs of immigrant communities, the needs of single-parent households, and so on, do not fit into that model, and hence we need to do something to adapt. And my grave concern is that by the time you layer on faculty governance and accreditation and other kinds of regulatory systems in place, it's very hard to dig in deep and disaggregate this educational experience and provide it to these populations in this stackable way. Just one thought on this is that the best liberal arts colleges in the country actually had some of this figured out early on in a way. It's not precisely stackable credentials, but they realized that they're not going to get their superior graduation rates that they have at places like Williams College if people have to do 40 courses to get to graduation. If you're at Williams College, you do 30 courses to get to graduation. And there's a kind of narrow band in the general education experience that creates a common intellectual core for the students at that small college. It's the same kind of idea in a way. You have a logistical problem moving people through credentials. If you cram more into each course and offer fewer courses, you get good results. We have in this state that model in a number of places. But guess what? They're in those awful for-profit institutions, right? We demonize the innovators in this space, the for-profits, because they're reaching the marginal populations. Just a few hundred yards from here is a college that has one of the highest graduation rates in the state, 68%. For minorities, 100% graduation rate for Hispanics and blacks, 50% graduation rate for Native Americans. But it's Eagle Gate College, and I don't know if I'm offending anyone if I say, but it's accredited by ACICS, a national accreditor that has very high standards, but you can't transfer those credits into the state system in the state of Utah because it's not regionally accredited. It's only nationally accredited, even though it has that kind of rate. So we are in a position where we are, we still with our, we have a number of professional norms that punish innovation and don't reward it.
So Paul, I'm going to pose this question to you, but we want to hear from President Holland as well. Two things that came up. I'm going to ask two different questions at a different time based on what you said. But one idea to really facilitate innovation or disruption that's been floated is to change the funding model from the state. So the state, albeit the percent that they contribute towards the student is a lower percent than it used to be. But what if we took a chapter from the migration of healthcare? Right now, we're seeing healthcare increasingly funded based on performance. The pushback for many years has been, well, everybody's too different, and it depends on economic, things, and whether they smoke or whether they exercise, and the list goes on and on, all these variables that are hard to control for. And yet healthcare is increasingly saying, we're not going to pay you for a procedure, we're going to pay you for the output, for the success. And therefore, doctors are increasingly focused on the efficacy of what they're delivering. What if we do the same thing in education? What if the state increasingly funds outputs? Right now, their method tacitly incents, butts and seats. And butts and seats in the cheapest classes, right? Not engineering, not science, but the cheaper to support courses. And there isn't a incentive or motive to migrate to a more efficient manner. So everything that you just delineated, couldn't we disrupt it by changing the way we fund higher education to pay for outputs, thus focusing everybody in the university on that which matters most, and that is the relevance and depth of what the students know and can do?
Well, yeah, again, I go to some of the structural challenges. I mean, there are billions of dollars at stake in the current funding model in the United States, which flows through, again, you have to be an accredited institution under the old model. And the old model is very much butts in seats. It's credit, it's a credit delivery system that measures time and seat instead of competency. Now, thankfully, a number of the accreditors and at the national level, they're looking more at competency-based, and we have, again, in this state, a nice innovation with Western Governors University as a model of addressing, the competency end. But I do think, because so much funding comes through the Pell system and so on, it just rewards that kind of behavior. Now that said, if anyone here will sign a non-disclosure agreement with me, I've often thought that the correct model, if what we're thinking about is the wonderful development of human capital, that over a lifetime of experience, that the proper model, proper business model for higher education, perhaps all of education, is that the educators should be compensated with a portion of the future income stream of those people that pass through the system. And sign me up. It creates an opportunity for them to think very carefully about, are you adding the correct kind of value to their experience that will help them over a lifetime? And if someone could figure that out, I'm ready to work with you on that basis.
Well, you said that we wanted to be practical, right, and grounded in the real world at some level, even as we brainstorm and think about this. Theoretically, I'm very open and interested in performance-based measures and incentives. I think it could have a helpful reorienting, especially down on, kind of through the ranks of faculty and others who, for very good reasons, are often very committed, wedded to, interested in their disciplines, as opposed to thinking about the broader impacts of where their students might end up. Again, there are reasons for that, and they're not all bad reasons. But and there has been a move this year, by the way, in the state legislature. We got a little bit of funding based on performance measures. The presidents came together in concert with legislative leadership to say, we're not going to fund everything this way, but that we're going to put a little pot of money, and it's going to be predicated on performance rather than promise. And so there's a willingness and appetite to try to experiment with this. But I do think when you really start to look at it, you look at places like Tennessee boasts that it's an entirely performance-based system. When you really get into the details, that's just not true. It's a very difficult thing to pull off. And let me just give a few examples of challenges that are inherent with it. One is, if you come to a place like Utah Valley University and say, okay, Matt, it's performance-based measure, we need more graduates, you're going to be funded by how many graduates you turn out. Well, I know how to change that today. And I jack up my required ACT and GPA scores, and I jack up tuition, and I just get the cream of the crop students, and I handhold them all the way through on a very expensive model. And my graduation grades are going to skyrocket. And I'm going to get a lot of pats on the back from my academic colleagues that, boy, you really increased the rigor and the quality and the success. And I will have left thousands and thousands of students without access to higher education. So I'm not saying that problem can't be overcome, but it's a very thorny issue that would have to be thought through in terms of how do you measure performance in a way that still gives, especially the public institutions, the incentive to go reach out to the students who most need education, but in some ways have the least access to it and the least inclination to approach it. So that's one issue. The other issue is just, again, from the public perspective, there are the realities of public funding and the politics involved and the lag time involved. So you might have a legislature today that says, okay, performance-based funding. 5 years from now, are those the same legislators in place? Are those the, and how are we measuring? If I get a student today, the measurement period, and this is nationally the norm, is 6 years. So I won't know really for 6 years what my success rate is with that student and the things we need to go into place. So again, not necessarily a problem that can't be overcome, but a thorny issue that has to be dealt with. Last thing I'll say is we do have, and it's been alluded to, we do have a very successful performance-based model at work in this region, and it is the Western Governors University. But something we need to keep in mind about that is that I think these numbers are roughly right. Last year in the state of Utah, 22 freshmen signed up for Western Governors University. It's a model that works especially well for your more mature, more motivated, more self-disciplined student, and that is typically not your 18-year-old. The 18-year-old student needs a campus experience, they need mentors, they need counselors, they need a cultural environment that will move them forward. And that's really hard to do on what I sometimes hear this push, more online, more performance-based. We may not even need to have a campus anymore. That, for some students, is working and is working really well in that Western Governors model, but it's not the model, I'm not convinced, will reach the masses of our 17, 18-year-old kids coming out of high school.
So Matt and Paul contribute here. What's a better model? We've got employers out there. My office is 5 blocks away from the University of Utah. How often do they call and say, how are we doing? What do you need? What would generate better paying jobs? What would propel the economy? Randy, how can we teach economics more effectively? Instead, we teach the same curriculum in the same way, and when a business person floats to the commissioner hard ideas to improve education, he says, and tomorrow we would have 8 faculty senates delivering a no confidence vote on their president of the university. How do we turn it upside down? What is the right model to align the performance on demonstrable acquisition of the skills and capabilities that are going to help these students or graduates most succeed?
Well, again, there are these norms, like you say, that suggest that if you mix the academic and the commercial, that there's something that sometimes in some kinds of programs is illegitimate. And yet you look at models like the state of Virginia. Virginia has a very robust regional community college system. And this state, what I worry about with the model that's developed, and this is, I want to applaud Matt for the efforts that he is undertaking at UVU for maintaining the health of the associate's degree program embedded within now a larger university. This is a tough thing to navigate. But I do wish that what we had in this state were, instead of thinking, oh, isn't it great that now, you know, Dixie is a university and is going to this other, that instead we highlighted and celebrated the great work that's done in the two-year junior college experience, which is this kind of is part of this stackable experience. So in the university in Virginia, the system is regional community colleges, and it is very much their mandate to work directly with the large employers in that area to continuously assess what the economic needs of those employers are. I lived in rural Virginia for a long time. One of the best forestry programs in the country was at a little place called Dabney Lancaster Community College. You got an associate's degree, fine general education that helped you to be a better communicator, have, you know, good numeracy, but then you were automatically employable by Georgia Pacific and other major companies that were operating in that rural environment.
So Paul and I have had this running conversation. There's no revelations here, but I do think there's a common theme here that we would both agree on. I think, which is the point is, as I said already, we do have to have this cultural shift, and here's where the business community can help, and is helping, and that is to say that we need to have the public, both in the private sector and in our public councils and legislatures, speak and act and move in a way that says we reward, we privilege, we compliment those institutions that are really sort of bucking what are those very strong pulls, and Paul's talked to them very effectively, and I don't disagree with his assessment about sort of the structures in place that have this very strong inertia for how higher education institutions develop. But for those that are trying to resist those pulls and say we have to, even as we continue to build out great four-year degrees and get kids prepared for graduate school, which has to continue to happen, that we really enshrine, fund, and complement and give respectability to those other degrees, the certificate, the two-year degrees, et cetera. And I do think there are different models that can do it. I think I don't disagree at all with Paul about the power of the community college model, and that is a very low-cost, high-impact way to get some of these returns, and that tends to be more industry responsive at some level. I also think there are some limitations to that model that the Utah UVU model overcomes. It's not a perfect model. I wouldn't suggest that it is, but again, I think we get a lot of students who come in thinking they're just set for a certificate or two-year degree that go on and do much more than that, and it's a more seamless transition. And it's also, while it probably adds some cost to our certificate and associate degrees, it does mean that if you take our service region, for example, we are providing a dual function for our service region under the same set of buildings, same set of faculty members, same set of administrators. I don't see the state ponying up to go build a new community college in my service region anytime soon. And so the practical reality is to say, if that's the reality, then let's embrace this model. Let's complement it, privilege it, and make it work and fund it accordingly. So anyway, I'll let.
And you know, one thought. I mean, I have some very concrete thoughts on this, and it goes with the stackable, and it goes with our graduation rates that we have in the state. Why not at UVU, Weber, and Dixie have all entering students enroll as two-year students? instead of as four-year students. And what you'd find is an immediate opportunity to, create the stackable and dramatically improve the outcomes in terms of that graduation rate. I also want to just say one thing, because Matt and I have had long conversations about this. The graduation rate in Utah is low, but you have to understand, if we just focus on grad rates, we've missed something kind of interesting in this state. There's a lot of churn in this state, and the official graduation rate that is given by the U.S. Department of Education focuses on the first-time full-time freshman that shows up at a college, four-year freshman, and how they progress to a completion of that certification. In this state, we have a lot of churn in the system. People will start at one school, go on a mission, enroll in a different school. Just the mission itself creates a difficult measurement problem. Although missionaries in theory can drop out of that equation, it's very hard for secular schools to monitor who's actually left on a mission and who hasn't. And so we need to find better measures of what completion means and what success means in this. But I do think that the automatic enrollment might be at that AA level, would be one practical solution. Just another thought is that this issue of significant remediation that you brought up. Colleges are not well designed to handle remediation, and they need to be. Almost all students require some kind of remediation. Where that blame lies and so what that means, as Randy said, everyone wants to kick it back in some space, some other thing. One thing I'd suggest is we have a terrible problem in this state, again, with missions. And someone who wants to see a lot more of our youth serve on those kinds of missionary experiences, one of the terrible things that happens is degradation of math skills. Math degrades very quickly. I know, just trying to help factor some polynomials last night with my daughter, that I wasn't very effective at that. So this is just something we need to, we need to think in terms of who the population is that we're serving and adapt programs for their very specific needs. And we have some specific kinds of problems with these gaps in the educational experience that really affect the outcomes in the state.
Just a couple of other things in response. First of all, to the idea of having every student enter as a two-year student, that's a very interesting idea, and we're actually moving effectively in that direction in the following way, that based on some of the funding we got this year from the legislature, we've made a decision. We're going to remove the application fee for a two-year degree, and we'll send a letter to every student inviting them to apply for free for an associate's degree, effectively giving almost we're going to give you a two-year degree. You can opt out if you don't want it, but you've earned it and you should have it. And we think that's the step in the right direction, certainly a step in the way of what you're suggesting. And because so many of our students do earn, they get fixated on, well, I'm just here for the four-year degree, I don't really want to bother with that. But I think this not only will help those students who make it past the two-year mark but don't complete, but it also just helps build this culture of we value the two-year degree, and you ought to have that, just like people who still claim a master's when they get a PhD. You ought to claim your two-year degree when you get your four-year degree. Those are some of the cultural shifts that I think we need to be working on together. The second thing is, when I talk about the business community and the legislature, there was this move this year for STEM funding. And boy, that's a very helpful tool to someone like me, because again, I have faculty, and it's easy to be critical, and I don't want to do that because I know all the incentives and the interest they face to want to pursue their own fields, but at some point we need some oversight to say where we really need to go is we need more students in disciplines X, Y, and Z. And so when the business community and the legislature gets together and say, we're going to fund you, but we're going to fund you to develop more programs, to offer more scholarships, to have more counselors in these areas, that's the counterbalance an administration needs to work with a faculty senate and to work with shared governance and the realities of the world that we live in. And again, it's easy to criticize why those things exist, but there are some good reasons why they exist too. So I'm very grateful for what Mark Bouchard and Randy and others have done in this community, and the governor and others responsive. We didn't quite end up with what we hoped for in higher ed, but I think we sent a loud and clear message, and even just that is helpful as we go back at our institutions to say the business community needs more engineers, and they need more two-year, more highly trained technicians. And so we probably are gonna privilege a little bit more of that as we develop it going forward. And so that kind of back and forth is very helpful. As long as we do that and continue to affirm the purposes of a broad university education, saying it isn't all STEM, still important reasons to study history and poetry and music, I think we can make significant progress. Maybe not as fast as Randy Shumway would want, but I think the early signals are that we're moving in the right direction there.
So let's open it up for questions. Let's open it up for comments. As people are walking, we've got some microphones out there. We've got a gentleman right here in the middle. As he's doing that, let me make two comments. And that is, sometimes the business community comes and says, education, we're waiting for them to improve, we're waiting for them to do what we need them to do. I would tell you that the STEM initiative that Matt mentioned, $10 million invested in kind of a performance-based mechanism around science, technology, engineering, and math, was led by the business community. That was instigated by the business community. Mark Bouchard, who leads Prosperity 2020, and a host of business leaders advocating for that. Second, we're fortunate in this state to have a very pro-education governor. So we have our governor pulling, we have our business community pushing, and those two things are coming together in a very effective way in order to support the long-term economy of our state. And so those two things, I think, need to be mentioned. Again, the leadership of the governor, and then the business community, all of us that are here today, really do play a role in helping. So I've got a gentleman here that I believe has a mic. Why don't you stand? State your name, your organization, and your question, or your idea.
Sure. Kip Thompson, Economic Development International. I'm new to the state. I'm encouraged by this kind of dialogue, and I think it's very exciting. But one question I have is, to what extent are we really looking globally to ensure that we're competitive in what we're offering? You know, having spent time in all over the world, in India and China and even Europe, education is relatively free. And they move really quickly. Examples like Tec de Monterrey, where they really quickly rolled out education availability to people across the entire country of Mexico. Just spent some time at MIT, where they have, they're talking a lot about these, the MOOCs, the massive online courses. And, there are tools available, but it seems that a couple of things need to happen. One, we need to look at this as a competitive game. Two, we need to be aggressive, and frankly, I know education tends to move slow as conceptually, and the regulatory burden, et cetera, is real. But man, if we're really going to go somewhere as a country, we need to be competitive and move fast.
Amen. And when we see these statistics that put Utah in the middle of where the states are in the United States, we absolutely have to put that in a global perspective and recognize that the United States is somewhere like 38th among developed nations in terms of certain kinds of skills that are just critical in this new economy. And our children are not competing for jobs with people in Colorado and Washington State. They're competing for jobs with people in Bangalore and Shanghai and Singapore. And so we need to keep that perspective very bright and vibrant. I'm going to do a little shout out for the Deseret News. The Deseret News is regularly publishing on the front page of the Deseret News analysis about national education trends to help us. Today's banner headline is about online high school experience for people that had difficulty completing high school for one reason or another, and showing a national perspective about where Utah falls in being able to provide this kind of program. So we're going to keep a strong voice on that from our perspective. Front page every week, Celia Baker, and on our editorial pages, we will be pushing for global competitiveness. We do not fully take advantage of this, one of the great things in the state that's exceptional, which is the linguistic capacities of our people. So the number of languages that are well learned through the LDS missionary experience is just an extraordinary asset in this state. And I haven't seen anyone find a great way to leverage it. I was just talking to some gentlemen here about Brigham Young University. They have, how many people speak Spanish on the BYU campus? And their Spanish major is all devoted to Spanish literature. Not a bad pursuit, but my goodness, the number of people that could translate that Spanish experience into really powerful strategic business and scientific careers, we're just missing it.
Well, I think the point is spot on, and I find real promise and hope in what I see as a fairly decisive shift in the rhetoric about higher education in the state of Utah that's just happened more or less over the last year to 18 months. And it is this idea of 66% of our graduates will have a post-secondary degree. That is in the water, it's in the ether. We're all talking about it. It's almost sort of assumed, yes, that's what we need to do. And that's not where we were 3 or 4 years ago. I came into office 3 or 4 years ago, and the big story from you know, the UVU perspective was, boy, you've got all this growth and the economy's bad, we can't afford it. You got to cap enrollment and raise tuition, and that's the way forward. But that would have the whole mental model there is, you know, just save money and don't worry about how many graduates we have, and that's not the right answer. And now again, thanks to the governor, thanks to Mark Bouchard, thanks to the Salt Lake Chamber, Randy, you know, all the folks who've gotten involved, voices from the Deseret News and others. There's a recognition that we have to hit the 66% goal, which is based on a study that takes in both domestic and global trends about what the employment needs will be of each distinct region. And I think it's really changed the way that we all look at what our obligations are to move forward, which is to get more students into the system, get them credentialed with something that will leave them prepared to enter industry and contribute to society.
Let's go to another question. While we do that, let's take this gentleman here on the front as he stands. While we do that, sometimes we forget how good we do have it. That's not to say we don't need to improve. Cicero Group, the company for which I'm affiliated, is a nice example. We relocated from San Francisco to Salt Lake City 7 years ago. We had 18 employees at the time. Today we have 206. And one of the reasons is what Paul mentioned, is the linguistic and cultural experience. We're now able to do data collection in 14 unique languages, 47 different countries. And that's just been a boon to our data-driven strategy organization. And we couldn't have done that in San Francisco. And it wasn't just because it was an anti-business community. It was because that type of really diversity. I know that's going to sound surprising to call Salt Lake City diverse and San Francisco not. But from a business perspective, that type of diversity wasn't as easily available. So that's definitely something we ought to harness more effectively in higher ed. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, okay, I'm live. Paul, you came out with a word that I haven't heard associated with education for some time, and that's competency. Talk about a stackable. We start stacking education before kindergarten, because now all this effort is being raised on ready to go to kindergarten. And the disparity between the students that show up in kindergarten and the third grade reading level is very noticeable. So the thing is that if we can work the competency into the education and build the steps on competency, why then we can get up to a population coming to the universities that's prepared. Matt, how many individual student remedial classes are you giving out at this moment?
Well, I was going to call Randy a little bit on his statistics. I don't know. We may be looking at different things, but in anticipation, I did just check the UVU statistics. We're down 34% for remedial education in general. If you include Math 1050, college level math, and English level 1000, we're up to 50%, which is still very high. It's not 75%, but still very high. And there are a lot of things going on there with the math issue. We don't have a culture of taking math in our senior year in high school with so many LDS missionaries. That means people who are actually pretty bright, well-prepared kids for college come back with, having been out of math for 3 or 4 years, and so they need to remediate. So our numbers are not as high as I think has been cited, and they're a little artificially high because of some cultural reasons. But it's not to say that this isn't an important issue, and we need to have folks better prepared for college.
But if they came to you with a competency level to assume college math, why, that would cut out the need for that, and that they would stay in the competency system until they did that. When they come back, instead of going to you, to go back into the competency level education system, which we now call K through 12, but I think that designation needs to disappear, because if we bring them up on competency levels, well, then we know what they know. Right now, high school education will tell you one thing for sure: how long they sat in a seat. Aside from that, you can't assume anything. If somebody comes to you with a competency level rating in the various core competencies, you know what they know. Thank you.
And the issues of measurement on this are very important, and thank you for raising this. Let me just say, in addition to competency, culture is so important on this, and especially with the kinds of populations that have the greatest need that are out there. Like I said, I really do believe the low-hanging fruit, a lot of this has been harvested. But I'm really disappointed that I have to be here with you today. Usually at this hour, I am at Meadowlark Elementary in Rose Park, helping Mrs. Reevy's first grade class with some of their reading. And it's the best 40 minutes I spend each week. And Mark Bouchard's example of trying to get all of us in the business community to engage in the classroom, I don't think we can overstate how important that is in helping to provide real role models and real experience for populations that don't have built in an idea about their future, including higher education, including persisting through and completing the education that they so desperately need. And so I think that's just another thing, as we're thinking about all of this measurement and competency, that we can play a role in helping to improve the overall culture and ambition through our example and service. Have time for just one more question. Go ahead.
Make it quick. My name is Amy Davis. I'm from the University of Utah Office of the Vice President for Research. And Randy, you asked the question about how often does the U call you to ask how do we better train our students to come into the workforce. And I actually came here today with the complementary question, which is how do we at the university reach out to the business community and to the Utah state government to be mentors to our students and also help form instructional or career development pathways for our students. So my specific goal is I'm working on a grant to the National Institutes of Health that they just solicited, or they just released a solicitation for best practices for training the biomedical workforce. And the issue is that the NIH largely funds almost all of the PhD level training in biomedical sciences in this country. And all of that training is geared toward academic positions. And the reality is that only about 20% of those graduates produced actually go on to get tenure track positions. And so one thing that I'm hoping to find are partners in the business community, whether it be patent law, the pharmaceutical industry, life sciences, K-12 education, liberal arts education, to come and partner with the university to help develop a proposal that will define best practices for workforce training.
Thank you. I've been given the time signal, so I'm going to quickly answer your question as effectively as I can, and I'm going to summarize, if that'd be all right. First, two interesting things. One is my experience with the business community. I'll bet you I'll see a lot of nods of heads. Our lives were enormously changed because of great professors, teachers, administrators. When the dean of the business college calls me, I can assure you he's one of the first people I call back. There's just an admiration and appreciation, and I don't think higher education realizes the respect the business community has for our teachers. The second is that I think the business community often feels that when it's asked for its opinion and invited to come and offer it, they're then lectured to for 60 minutes about how great the university is, and not actually asked what the university can do differently. And so that would be a suggestion of, we believe you're great. Now ask us how you can help. And we got lots of ideas, as you could see all the hands raised up here. Hey, I'm going to summarize. I heard 6 great points. And if it'd be okay, I'll just reiterate them. One idea that came up today was that our UVUs, our Dixies, our Weber States probably ought to play more of a dual function, enrolling students, as Matt is doing, in a 2-year program immediately, so it is more of a stackable credential. And so having this dual function, removing the application fee, great thinking. Second, we need some mechanism to fund disruption and alignment with the workforce demand. We're seeing a little bit of that in STEM funding that we got passed, and thanks to the business community for helping there. Third, we need to celebrate the successes, the demonstrable acquisition of skills, whether that be from the publics or the privates like Westminster, or the for-profits like the Universities of Phoenix. Fourth, we need to fund and pay a little bit more attention to remediation, especially for our return missionaries who didn't do a lot of math for the previous 18 months or 2 years. Fifth, let's do a better job leveraging our linguistic and cultural advantage, and it is a real comparative advantage here in the state of Utah, and in business in particular, not just teaching them Spanish history or Chinese art. And then 6, and I starred this one, I appreciate Paul ending with it. We as the business community not only need to put our money where our mouth is, not only do we need to come to the U and contribute our best thinking, but kudos to Paul and others like him that are actually going to the classroom and working with the students and helping them. And we hope that the business community not only will continue to do that, but will support their employees in taking time out to go do that. Thank you for coming. We'll hang out a little bit longer if any of you want to talk to us one-on-one. Thanks again for joining us.